I was pushing, looking for a school setting in particular. And I think often it comes down to school. It's one of the highest demand environments. It's also a really crucial community support system for parents. And so there's a lot at stake there. So it's a place that parents will push, and I did too.
Entering the world of neurodiversity often unveils paths of personal discovery and challenge. How can parenting nudge adults toward uncovering their own neurodivergence? And what's this idea of low-demand parenting all about? Does it mean no expectations, or is it something deeper? We're diving into the messiness of self-discovery and parenting with Amanda Diekman, a late-diagnosed autistic adult and author of Low-Demand Parenting. All of this and more straight ahead on episode 194. I'm Emily Kircher-Morris, and this is the Neurodiversity Podcast.
What is neurodiversity?
You see the world differently.
Autism spectrum.
Gifted.
Complexities that are inherently inside.
ADHD.
Dysgraphia.
Tourette's.
All brains are different.
You are exactly what this world needs.
This is the
Neurodiversity
Podcast.
If you love learning and talking about neurodiversity, I would love to invite you to join our group on Facebook. The Neurodiversity Podcast Advocacy and Support Group is a friendly and welcoming environment for you to connect with other neurodivergent adults, as well as parents and educators of neurodivergent kids. It is a low-drama Facebook group, which, as I'm sure you know, can be rare these days, and we are all there to support each other with advice and friendship. Also, when we collect questions for our AMA episodes, they come exclusively from the Facebook group members. So come on over and join us in the Neurodiversity Podcast Advocacy and Support Group on Facebook. I hope to see you there. All right, my conversation with Amanda Diekman is up in just a minute.
Previously on the Neurodiversity Podcast.
You know, when I was a kid, oftentimes you didn't find what you were really good at until you were like 14, 15, 16, even older. But now we expect kids to find that area of excellence when they're really quite young. And the way they tell us that they're not ready for that is by looking like they're unmotivated and unwilling to try new things because they're afraid they're not going to be successful in them. And we tend to want to love the kid who we want that kid to be, as opposed to the kid who was right in front of us telling us what they already love to do.
That's episode 171. Find it wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm welcoming Amanda Diekman to the podcast today. Amanda is a late-diagnosed autistic adult, parent of neurodivergent children, and author of the book Low-Demand Parenting. She also supports families as a parent coach. Amanda, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. I'm really thrilled to be here.
Many of us get into this world of neurodiversity because of our experiences parenting, and then we realize things about ourselves that perhaps we weren't aware of previously. And as I mentioned in the introduction, you are a late-diagnosed autistic adult, and I'm wondering how much of a role your experiences as a parent played in that process.
Yes, it's a great question. I started having thoughts when my kids were really young of like, wow, I feel like I'm dealing with a zebra in a world of horses. My child is not like all the others. And I was able to see their brilliant uniqueness and let that lead me into neurodiversity in a way that was always hard for me with myself. When I looked at myself, I was really scared of being perceived as different. I remember once somebody called me quirky, and I had a visible recoiling feeling like, I don't want to be quirky. I just want to be normal. I want to be like everybody else. And this deep-seated fear of being different really drove me for almost all of the years of my life until I began trying to create a world where my kids could be safe, where they could thrive, where they could be their full selves. And as I dug deeper into understanding them and understanding what they needed, I realized, wow, this is actually my own journey coming up. that in order to be the mom that I needed to be for them, I needed to do my own deep work around understanding who I really was beneath all the fear of being different, that actually that difference was a key part of what I needed to be the mom to my kids. And so, when my oldest was 4 and my middle was 2, I started asking everyone about autism. I had so many questions. And sadly, like so many others, the years of investigating took longer than it needed to because of so many misunderstandings and faulty ideas are out there. People were saying, oh, you have nothing to worry about. It's like, wait, I didn't know that this was something I needed to worry about. I wanted to be connected to a sense of identity and community. And it took my child's burnout and my own breakdown for me to really go where I needed to go and to get my own diagnosis, to do the deep grieving work, and ultimately to discover that I'm autistic, that we're all neurodivergent, and that we don't belong. We weren't made for this world as it is. And so we needed to get busy making our own world.
I love that idea, and recognizing that the stigma and the beliefs that we have about neurodivergence, first of all, prevent people from getting accurate diagnoses, but also getting the supports that they need. And so you really realized at that point, we just need to do something different.
I knew that the life we were living was leading us all into burnout and breakdown. And that the whole idea of pushing harder, which I think is really intimately interwoven with masking, that when we don't have the freedom to listen to ourselves and then opt out of the things that are systematically destroying either our sense of self or our well-being, our ability to rest, our ability to feel joy, when we don't opt out of those things in order to prioritize what matters most, that really solidifies the mask. It says the person everyone else perceives matters more than the person I am inside. And I grew up with that sense of duty to be the person the world wanted me to be. And there was never messaging around, but who are you really? And let's let everybody else down, but be true to ourselves. That's not a thing that I learned. Instead, I learned your coach is counting on you and everybody needs you and your classmates. You got to be a part of the classroom community and all of these messages that essentially said everybody else's experience of you matters more than your experience of yourself. And it wasn't until I had to turn around and deliver that message to my children that I realized, wait a minute, stop, hold the presses. I'm not going to recreate this machine. It's been killing me all along. I don't want to raise my children believing that their inner experience is invalid or unworthy of changing the whole world around us. That I'll change the world for them means I need to attune to what is doable for them, to their joy, to their sense of purpose in this world. And I talk in the book about grieving the dreams that I had for the kind of child that I would have, and instead waking up to the child right in front of me.
Yeah, that's a difficult process for parents to reconcile as they kind of adapt and recognize that their child is the child that's in front of them. And I don't know that parenting is what any of us really expects, but I think sometimes when you're parenting a neurodivergent child, it's even more different. There's an area that you share candidly about, and that is your experience of actually being diagnosed with PTSD related to the experiences of raising your son. And I suspect that some people might hear this and think to themselves that it's hyperbolic or that it wasn't quote unquote real PTSD, but for you it truly was. And so I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about what was happening, how did it build, and what have you done about it?
It's real trauma, first of all, for anyone who is listening and thinking, I don't know if what I've been through is real trauma. You can check in with yourself and ask, am I minimizing my own pain in order to protect others around me, or out of fear or stigma? Or does this feel real? Because you are worthy of naming your experiences as traumatic, because that can lead you to get the kind of healing that you really deserve. For me, it built over a year of my child being in burnout when they had constant nervous system dysregulation, and where I was the only and the primary both co-regulator and recipient of the dysregulation. So I was giving all of my brain power into stabilizing my child, and then receiving all of the I hate yous, all of the slammed doors, all of the kicks and the punches, and loving them every step of the way, knowing that I was aligned with myself, that I was doing what I needed to do to bring my child out of this incredibly dark period. But also at that point, I was so hyper vigilant about meeting my kids' needs and so mono-focused on that I didn't really I was in my own survival mode through that whole year. And I think this is an important part about parenting trauma, is that sometimes when our kids start getting better, when they start to leave the house again, they can maybe return to school or be with another caregiver besides you, when some of the expectations come down and you can breathe a little bit, at least for me, that is when the trauma symptoms set in, because my body could finally communicate to me, hey, wow, we've been way outside of threshold here for a long, long time. And there's an impact, and we're going to now need to deal with that impact. That's what my body began to tell me. My hands shook all the time. I couldn't think straight. I had a really foggy brain. I began to have some more intense psychological experiences of like depersonalization and a sense of floating outside of my body, which are intense symptoms and really scary, but essentially just symptoms of PTSD. And I had this overbearing sense that something bad was going to happen. I think I was feeling my own fragility, that we're not promised we're going to have a tomorrow. And I felt that, like, I don't know what I will do. I don't know what will happen. It all feels so fragile right now. The community around me said, you need to go into residential treatment for several months in order to heal. And I really considered that. Spent about 2 weeks preparing to go into residential treatment. And then I decided that those settings simply weren't neurodiversity friendly enough. Mm-hmm. And that they didn't understand parenting trauma in particular. That using a lens of relational trauma, like someone leaving a domestic violence situation or even emotional abuse, it's not the same as when it's your child, because there is a love and a sense of connection and of compassion, and that is different. And my sense is that the trauma community hasn't even really begun to wrestle with the meaning of parenting trauma. That those of us who've been through it, that it's up to us to tell our stories so that the wise thought leaders can interpret it and make a sense of what healing would look like. For me, I needed to heal in place. I needed to heal in my real life. That to leave it and then come back would just cause more trauma. And the attachment between me and my child, the sense of safety in my home, that I wanted to learn how to be safe and connected right here. And that it was up to the experts around me to get equipped to be ready to deal with what I was bringing to the table, that it was different than maybe the other situations of trauma that they dealt with before.
I agree with you that it's different, and it's a difference in healing and then moving forward, because in a lot of other situations, you don't have to go back to what that world is. Like if it is a domestic abuse or something, like you can leave. You can go and start something new. But with parenting, especially when your children are young, that's not realistic. And so you have to find a new way forward. I'm wondering if and when the idea of low demand parenting, when did that come into play? How did that play into both your healing process as well as just your relationship with your child?
We began low demand when my child went into burnout. Mm-hmm. So I'd say there was a turning point day, a kind of before and after day, where before I was pushing, looking for a school setting in particular. And I think often it comes down to school. It's one of the highest demand environments. It's also a really crucial community support system for parents. And so the pressure to continue to participate in schooling, there's a lot at stake there. So it's a place that parents will push, and I did too. And then after 4 school settings in a couple months' time in a pandemic with a kid who had an undiagnosed autistic brain and a PDA profile, there came an eruption day where I picked him up and carried him to his teacher, and she restrained him, and I walked away, and that was the day it all fell apart. And we never came back from that day. We've healed from that. We've grown forward from that. But there was a fundamental breaking and shattering that happened that we've never, quote unquote, healed from that, in that we've never gone back to the way it was before. It's always been an after for us. And I think of burnout that way, that if we think of it as like you're one person and then you go through the burnout, it's more like entering into a metamorphosis, that the child who comes out of burnout is different than the one that went in. And I think it's true of the whole family. So the day he went into burnout, something broke in him, but something broke in me. And I said, I don't want to be this parent. I don't want to do this again. I had already begun to break apart even before I knew just how serious this was going to be. And low demand is how I responded to the reality that my child simply couldn't do all the things that kids were supposed to be able to do. That from that day on, he needed to watch YouTube for 12 hours a day. His food choices went down to basically pretzels and Nutella. And he couldn't speak anymore. He couldn't walk. He lost the ability to have any kind of back and forth reciprocal conversation. All of these skills that he'd been slowly developing over years dropped out in one day. And I was looking at him thinking, is this a failure? Is this a colossal failure? A failure on me or for him? And I thought, no, this is what he needs to do to heal. I need to trust him right here, that he is good enough right here, that he is okay right here. And that was me dropping the first cascade of demands, that instead of holding on to them and thinking, okay, well, maybe one day we'll get back there, it was radical acceptance. Like, this is where we are. And nothing else matters right now except nurturing and stability. That's really the core of low demand parenting. It's really about radical acceptance. The demands that you let go of are those things that are getting in the way of saying to your child, you are good enough right here, just as you are.
A question that I hear from people that I think is sometimes worth exploring is, I think people equate like the idea of low demand parenting with no expectations. But in my mind, it's a little bit different. But I'm wondering if you can elaborate on that a little bit.
Absolutely. I define a demand as anything that is too hard in the present moment. And that sense of too hard is coming from our nervous system. So it's really our body's ability to scan this environment, this expectation, and ask, is this safe and doable? And that when our child says back to us with their behavior or their words or simply their body's reaction, this isn't safe, this isn't doable, we listen and we respond. And that the cumulative effect of doing that is that we create a set of expectations, of positive expectations that our kids can meet, that keeps them in their window of tolerance. And that by staying in our window of tolerance day after day after day and creating a whole family culture around respecting that window of tolerance, honoring it, and preserving it, that's actually what enables us to grow and to expand and to try new things. That many parents think it's when we hold high expectations and push our kids that that's when they grow. But in reality, what we understand now about brain science and the nervous system, that it's actually when we feel safe enough is when we grow. When we feel capable enough, that's when we stretch. And that all of the pushing that we're doing is really can be masking our kids' difficulties, concerns, and struggles. And then they pop out all kinds of sideways and upside down places. So it's not no expectations at all. It's expectations that are aligned to our kids' capacity. And then we do our own deep work around those other expectations that we would love to be true. So many of us would love to be able to say, hey, put your homework away and then go and take the dog for a walk. Like, how wonderful would it be if you could just say that and they would do it? But some of our kids can't.
Or some days they can and other days they can't, which is also very confusing.
Yes, it's both creating a set of expectations that our kids can meet day after day after day, and honing in on that sense of felt safety for them, as well as creating opportunities for them to tell us, hey, I actually really love walking the dog, but I can't do it at the end of the week. I'm too tired, or I can't do it by myself. I need somebody to go with me. I think that the collaborative part of parenting that all of us want to get to, we really want to get to the point where our kids, where we are in deep connection with, and where we trusted and connected. I think that that's true, on a heart level for all of us. But the avenue to get there is actually a radical divergence from standard parenting approach. It's actually this process of attuning and dropping the expectation that they walk the dog every day is what creates the opportunity for them to voice to us, hey, this is actually too hard for me sometimes. But I do want to do it. Or maybe they don't want to do it at all. And what they really want to be doing during that time is playing a game with you or playing outside with a friend and creating room for them to bring those things to us and say, this is what I really want from my life, and I need support in order to pursue it.
An observation that I have seen you make is that when we're supporting our kids, energy matters more than words. Can you talk more about what that means to you and how that ties in with everything we've been talking about?
Yes. As very sensitive humans, which most of us neurodivergent people fall on a sensitivity framework, many of us are actually attuning to energy more than anything else. And this is a place for me that as I've thought about my life and tried to make sense of my undiagnosed autistic experience, that I was often picking up on other people's energy and then trying to figure out why their words didn't match. They would say something like, it's fine, you don't have to do it. But their energy says, I'm so disappointed in you and I don't see you the same way again because I let this thing go. Then what I feel is incredibly devastated and like, I never want that to happen again. And the same is true for my kids. This is an oppressive part of parenting culture today that I think we need to call out a bit more. It's the eternal pressure to be calm. And so then when we are feeling frustrated or angry or disappointed or sad, and our kid says like, are you mad at me? We say, no, I'm not mad. I'm just a little worked up. And then the kids experience, wait, I'm pretty sure that something was going on there. I'm pretty sure you were mad, but then you said you weren't mad. Maybe there's something wrong with being mad. Maybe there's something really scary going on behind the scenes. Maybe she's really, really mad, and that's why she can't tell me. They're left wondering, what was that energetic experience I just went through? And why are they not being honest about it? Especially for our neurodivergent kids, where they're already trying harder than most kids to make sense of those maps of internal experience and named emotion and energetic expression, and they're highly attuned. I think we really owe it to ourselves and our kids to be more honest.
Yeah.
My son started saying, are you happy, sad, mad, frustrated? Every time he felt an energetic blip from me. Are you happy, sad, mad, frustrated? Every time. And I realized it was his way of saying, like, let me in. What is this? I'm feeling something from you. And you keep saying it's nothing, because I was so afraid that if I wasn't calm all the time, I was going to dysregulate him. But it was actually that mismatch of my emotion and my naming that was the most dysregulating thing, that actually teaching him that I'm still safe when I have a big feeling is what has led to a lot more healing and honesty in our relationship. And I've heard that from many of my clients that I've worked with, that actually when they start being more transparent and honest with their kids, especially for PDA kids who have a really high bar for transparency and honesty and integrity, that it can be an essential piece of the puzzle for us to start telling the truth about our emotional experience.
I think that modeling is so important for all kids, because if they don't see that, they have this idea that adults somehow have it all figured out and that they're always regulated, or that they should pretend that they are. It's so difficult and unhealthy. But even as a parent, we could also say something along the lines of, I'm not ready to talk about it right now, but come back to me in 10 minutes, or something like that, like to even just validate the fact that, yes, what you're seeing is accurate, but also recognizing for ourselves as a self-regulation, like what do we need in that moment as well to kind of then move beyond it, but also in a collaborative state.
Exactly.
I want to just talk briefly about shame, because I feel like we've alluded to that a few times throughout our talk here, but that it's just such a really intense emotion and one that can be really difficult to talk about, because shame is the emotion we feel when we've either let somebody down or believe that we are inherently a bad person. But I do also recognize that, for what it's worth, parents utilize shame as a tool frequently, and sometimes maybe not even realizing it. Or I would also say perhaps in the educational system, in the schools too. And it really influences our relationships.
Yeah, Emily, you nailed it. It's a primary tool that parents are using, often without awareness, not really aware that one of the core reasons that punishments and rewards so-called work for some kids is that we are making it sufficiently painful and sufficiently wonderful that they are more motivated to escape this negative experience, which is often shame. And they'll do pretty much anything not to feel that. And that becomes a primary motivator in our kids' lives to do the things that we want them to do. But as trying to escape shame, running from shame is something that many of us parents can really relate to, probably on a painful personal level. If we think about the role of shame in our own childhoods, how did we feel about our own mistakes? How did we feel, if we're neurodivergent, how did we feel about the places that we stepped off the path, that we had needs that were out of the bounds? Did we hear, hey, you're too sensitive, you're too much, you talk too much, you move too much, why can't you, why won't you just? If we heard all those messages, we were internalizing shame. There's something wrong about you. You are bad and broken. And so you'd better get it together and shape up. And those harmful messages are now nestled down really deep inside of us. And they are getting triggered in our parenting life.
Mm-hmm.
People will even bring up questions of shame as I talk about my experience with PTSD. You shouldn't talk about this. You know, your kid is going to be harmed. One day someone's going to tease them on the playground because they made their mom have a breakdown. And the antidote to shame, that in the moment, the direct antidote to shame is connection. It's speaking about it. It's bringing it out. And I have felt such healing by saying to myself and the world, I have nothing to fear here. This is my story. This is my experience. The thing that matters most to me is being in deep alignment with myself and deep connection with my children. So you can say anything you want about me and it will roll off because I know what matters most to me. And I think that posture can be really anti-shaming because it says to the world, hey, use all your shame tactics that you want to, but they won't work on me because I know myself and I know what matters.
Mm-hmm.
It also helps when you're making divergent parenting choices. Like, we don't do shared family meals around the table. And my kids often can't, quote unquote, behave in public. They don't always wear the typical clothing and they don't express themselves in like acceptable language. They might yell at me in public. And all of that is shamed. People look at me with shaming looks and often words that back it up. So if you're vulnerable to shame and you're trying to do these accommodating moves for your children, it's going to be extra hard. That's why I think developing a shame-proof relationship to yourself can be a really essential part of the low demand process. It's a deeper level of unmasking, I find, for myself, because it's finding that little bitty young part of me that was so afraid that I was broken and wrong. and saying to her, you were always just exactly right, just the way you were. And now I'm going to stand with you. And now I'm not going to let anyone hurt you. And now you are free.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I want for my children too.
Yeah.
So I'm not afraid of what happens with the bully on the playground, because my kid knows their own story. They know my story and they know theirs. And they say, I went through a really hard time, but you know what? We came out of it and look what we've done.
I love that. Amanda, I'm so glad that we've had this chance to talk today. And as we wrap up, it brings me to our last question. And I'm wondering, if you were able to send a message back to yourself when you were really struggling or starting on this journey, what would you say? What is it that previous version of yourself most needed to hear?
I was terrified to let things go. I thought that my own consistency and follow through was what everything in our family hinged on. I had been told that kids only feel safe when they have consistent parents who followed through on all of the things and who provided these really solid boundaries. And I was so scared of what would happen if I let go of that whole thing. And then my child went into burnout. And I thought, man, where did all that get me? What I wish I could go back and tell myself from in the before is it's okay. There's no steep cliff you're going to go over if you say yes to the popsicle, or if you say, sure, come on in my bed, let's snuggle after your bad dream. That it isn't in pushing my kids to be more and more independent and more self-sufficient, that I don't have to be so rigid, that it is truly okay to choose safety, to choose connection, to choose trust. I think we've been done a disservice by all of our fear of permissiveness. And I think that that's one thing I really want to stand up and say is you're allowed to let things go. You're allowed to lower your expectations. You're allowed to say, yeah, don't turn in your homework. Yeah, skip your soccer game. Sure, quit ballet. Yeah, your friend, really wants you to come over and you don't want to go. That's all right. Like we can say no, we can back out, we can opt out. And then we can also be safe enough in order to stretch and thrive. And it's in that balance of finding what makes us feel safe and finding what makes us feel whole, and then entering out into the world in alignment with ourselves. That's the process of unmasking and of being kind of joyfully and publicly neurodivergent.
Amanda Diekman, author of Low Demand Parenting, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
There is so much parenting advice that we hear from all angles. Don't be a snowplow parent. Let your kids be free-range kids. Raise your kids so that they're ready for the real world. It can be hard to recognize what's right, so I want to provide a little nuance to this conversation. Recognizing that feeling safe is a basic human need is a good starting point. So at times, for some kids, reducing demands helps them calm their neurological system to feel safe, which then primes them to be able to engage in productive struggle. And productive struggle is important to help them learn and develop. But we can do this without throwing them into a sink-or-swim survival situation. Every kid is different, but every human needs to feel safe, and that might look different for different people. I'm Emily Kircher-Morris. I'll see you next time on the Neurodiversity Podcast.
So we come to this mountain all over. We will climb it again together. I will always be right by your side. And whatever this world throws our way, if the wolves come howling, I'll keep them at bay. I will always be right by your side.
We appreciate Amanda Diekman's time. We've included links to her work in the show notes. Also, don't forget to leave us a rating and a review on your podcast platform of choice. They don't all have that feature, but if yours does, your kind words would go a long way. Our host is Emily Kircher-Morris. Our office manager and social media director is Krista Brown. I'm the executive producer, Dave Morris. For all of us, thank you for listening, and we will see you next time. This is a service of the Neurodiversity Alliance.